Coming up on Network Africa. Sounds of heavy artillery and gunfire heard in Khartoum's twin city of Omdurman despite a 72-hour ceasefire. UN Chief Antonio Guterres urges warring parties in Sudan to return to negotiating table. Plus, Kenyan, Somali and Saudi students evacuated from Sudan. Welcome to the program. I'm Melissa Lagos. Sounds of heavy artillery and gunfire are reported in Khartoum's twin city of Omdurman despite a 72-hour US-brokered truce between the Sudanese Armed Forces and Rapid Support Forces, RSF. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the ceasefire has been agreed between both parties after 48 hours negotiations. The latest ceasefire attempt started yesterday at midnight. The 7 people were reportedly killed in an airstrike in the south of the capital ahead of the truce announcement. Since the violence began, residents of Khartoum have been told to stay inside. Food and water supplies have been running low. Meanwhile, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned the catastrophic conflagration in Sudan could engulf the whole region and beyond, urging warring parties, the Sudanese Armed Forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, to come to a negotiating table and bring an end to the fighting. Addressing ambassadors in the Security Council, Mr. Guterres said that hundreds of people have been killed, thousands injured since the outbreak of the fighting on April 15th. He called on the parties to stop combat operations in densely populated areas to allow unhindered humanitarian aid operations, including access to food, water, other essential supplies, and evacuation from combat zones.
I'm in constant contact with the parties to the conflict, and I've called on them to de-escalate tensions and to return to the negotiating table. We will continue our efforts with our partners to secure a permanent halt to the fighting as soon as possible. Working with humanitarian organizations on the ground, we are reconfiguring our presence in Sudan to enable us to continue supporting the Sudanese people. Let me be clear, the United Nations is not leaving Sudan. Our commitment is to the Sudanese people in support of their wishes for a peaceful and secure future. We stand with them at this terrible time.
Well, Farhan Haq, deputy spokesman for UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, said the United Nations has relocated hundreds of staff members and dependents from Khartoum and other locations in Sudan. He adds that the United Nations will carry out its work with its personnel both inside and outside.
The Secretary General.
The eruption of violence in Sudan between the military and the Rapid Support Forces has killed at least 427 people, knocked out hospitals, as well as other services, turning residential areas into war zones.
About 700 UN, international, non-governmental organization staff and embassy staff and their dependents have reached Port Sudan by road. Dozens of UN internationally recruited and international NGO staff have already been evacuated from El Geneina and Zelenghi to Chad, while other operations are ongoing or planned. A small number of internationally recruited personnel, including the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Volker Perth, will remain in Sudan and will continue to work towards a resolution to the current crisis and returning to the UN-mandated tasks. The UN is also taking necessary measures to protect Sudanese staff members and their families, and is exploring every possible avenue to support them.
The United Nations Acting Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator in Sudan, Abu Deng, says the fighting must stop and the people in the country urgently need a humanitarian pause. Briefing journalists by telephone from Sudan, Deng said the scores of people who have been killed is high and hundreds have been injured. The humanitarian coordinator adds that people must be able to have access to food, fuel and other critical supplies, as well as services for their families. Deng also said that aid must reach millions in need, noting that before the violence, humanitarian needs were already very high. He indicated that 1/3 of the population, around 15 million people, need humanitarian aid. The humanitarian coordinator is also concerned about reports of sexual harassment and violence. And as foreign countries continue efforts to evacuate their citizens and diplomatic staff from Sudan, Kenya says it has evacuated 39 Kenyan, Somali and Saudi students from the war-torn country. The Cabinet Secretary for the Ministry of Defense, Aden Duale, greeted the students on the tarmac and said Kenya would do as many trips as possible to evacuate Kenyans and other nationals from other countries. The students who attended the International University of Africa in Khartoum described their ordeal and said they were positive that help would come.
All the evacuees are students from the International University of Africa based in Khartoum, the Sudan. 39 in total, as I said earlier, 19 Kenyans and 20 from our allied states and friends.
Most of the time we were sleeping, as in lying down on the floor, just praying and keeping positive. Yeah, and I strongly had the feeling that I had to keep positive, very focused, and above all, to take any risk to get me out of that country.
And that must be great news for families of those students in those countries. Well, joining us to talk more about the situation in Sudan is security expert David Otto. He joins me from the nation's capital. Hi, David. Thanks for joining me. A 72-hour U.S. brokered truce declared between the Sudanese armed forces and rapid support forces. But it appears we're still hearing gunfires, Durman, for one, that particular area. Do you think that, this ceasefire would hold still for the period 72 hours?
That's one of the biggest challenge. Of course, the Sudanese armed forces under General Bohan and the rapid support forces under General Delgado or Hemiti, they both agreed after a truce, was reached by the United States and Saudi Arabia. And as you rightly said, there has still been gunshots being heard around Khartoum. And the reason why this is happening is because both sides are still not comfortable in terms of their positions and consolidation of critical infrastructures. Example, the airports, the national army headquarters, the presidential palace, the national radio station. All these very critical infrastructures are quite key for both sides to get their hands on. So even though they've agreed on this 72-hour truce, which may allow for some level of, people to go out to get food, medication, essential goods. But, the danger, I have to say, is that it may also give both sides an opportunity to recalibrate, to re-strategize, and to come back fighting very seriously after the 72 hours. But the good news is that it does at least give you some opportunity for people who are willing to leave Khartoum. Remember, this war is not just being fought in Khartoum, it is fought in the Blue Nile, in the northern Kordofan, but also in the Darfur states. So it's quite alarming, but good news that at least we have two people who can agree for a truce for 72 hours.
And it also appears that we have good news coming from some students who attended the International University of Africa in Khartoum. We understand there are 39 Kenyan, Somali and Saudi students, and many wonder where Nigerian students are and when they're coming back home.
Well, the Nigerian government, has announced that it is doing all it can. I know that the National Security Advisor, alongside other agencies, including the Defense Intelligence Agency, they've been working to get, a direct communication with some of the Nigerian students and other Nigerians that are stranded and willing, I have to add, to leave Khartoum. Others have been advised to relocate within the safer regions in Sudan. But the situation is becoming more critical as more than 27, Western, including US, Asian, and Middle Eastern states, have hurriedly, evacuated most of their staff and people that want to leave. So I think it's quite important for countries like Nigeria, but other African countries to come to the rescue of those who are willing, to leave Khartoum under the circumstances. But it's quite challenging because, of course, the capabilities of countries like the United States, UK, for example, or Germany, it's not the same with, countries like Nigeria, but also the willingness, for individuals to leave, it's equally not the same. So you find, very few Africans wanting to leave as compared to their EU and Western counterparts.
We're also seeing, that there are worries that this conflict in Sudan, might cause a sort of continental refugee crisis, and not just that, it might also snowball into a bigger security crisis for the continent. Is this something you agree with?
No, I do agree. I mean, Sudan is a very strategic country, the third largest in Africa. But also remember that it shares a border with 7 strategic states, including countries like Eritrea, Egypt, Libya. These are all very unstable countries, Central African Republic, Chad, and South Sudan. So if this war continues at the same rate at which we've seen for the past 11 days, then it will be very concerning. Remember, Sudan, has not had a stable government since 2019 when Omar al-Bashir was overthrown, and that followed the coup d'etat of 2021. So quite concerning times, and we wish, Sudanese the best. But I think the way forward is to get the two generals to reconcile, so that we can get back on the negotiation table.
That is the multi-million-dollar issue, because we understand that this 72-hour ceasefire took 48 hours, intense negotiations, according to U.S. Secretary of State. There are reports that the internet connection remains largely disrupted across Sudan. This a lot of, speaks to a lot of fears for parents who want their, students to come back home, and or so many other problems getting in touch with family members who are there. And there's also the fear of the deliberate effort to sort of avoid people spreading false information, or do you think that these sort of tactics, war tactics, targeting critical infrastructures, what do you think is to come with the nature of things in Khartoum?
No, I mean, there are 2 critical points you have to look at here. One, considering the sporadic shootings, this was not a planned conflict, I have to say, because, it did happen, in what I describe as a broken biscuit scenario. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't planned. So the nature of the conflict between the 2 sides, has been quite unprecedented. The level of shooting and, targeting of critical infrastructures to subdue one side or the other has been very high. So there is a possibility that, some of the internet connecting agencies have been affected by that. And remember, a lot of people are leaving Sudan. So one reason could be that these critical infrastructures have been destroyed, by the sporadic shooting. Another reason, critically, could be that both sides want to continue to control the level of communication. I mean, propaganda, disinformation, and misinformation, information warfare is always very high because, the more people that you have, on your side, in terms of information spread, perhaps the more that you can leverage against your opponent. So it could also be that this is a deliberate tactic which has been employed by either side to make sure that information is limited. But also remember that one key reason is that both generals are worried that if there is a lot of, evidential documentation or video evidence of, some of the war crimes that are here is being committed, then they will be in for referrals to places like the International Criminal Court. So the less information gets out, perhaps the better for them. But again, this is again one of the challenges that this kind of warfare causes, where a de facto president is fighting with his deputy. I mean, it's quite concerning, for the region and for Sudanese as well.
David, and we will continue to monitor developments there. We'd like to appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Welcome back to health now. In order for the health sector to, in Nigeria, that is, to be fully developed, collaboration is key. Well, that's the view of experts who converged on Lagos to proffer solutions to the evolving sector through technology. Our technology correspondent, Victor Matthias, reports.
What will collaboration mean?
The healthcare industry in Africa is rapidly evolving, and digitization is playing a critical role in transforming the industry. In this room are experts in the health and fintech ecosystems ready to drop valuable nuggets to advance the current state of healthcare digitization in Africa and the opportunities and challenges faced by the industry.
For us to have a seamless operation amongst the doctors, pharmacists, lab scientists, logisticians, and all of the rest, even the bankers, the financiers, and so on, everybody in the loop, everybody has his own position, recognized and given his place. Bring together the physical and the technological deliveries we need. One rubs on the other.
The reason why people don't want to collaborate as well, right, is because maybe everybody's greedy. Right, people think they can do it themselves, right? And truth of the matter is that when you think you can do it yourself, you end up botching your service delivery. If you're thinking of emergency medical resources, you're thinking of people, right, who are the responders, doctors, nurses, paramedics. Thinking of places, right, which are the hospitals we all want to go to in emergencies, right? Thinking of ambulances, which are vehicles that you need to convey people in an emergency, to or fro, right? And then you're thinking of information, right? All this is the different forms of collaboration.
With internet penetration gaining traction, they say rural areas will not be left behind as these services will be at their fingertips.
First off, you take a look at the internet penetration and then the smartphone uptake in Africa, and it's a digital product. Prior to this time, if you go to a hospital and you have to transition from hospital 1 to hospital 2, maybe because you migrated from Lagos to, say, Abia, for instance, you would have to manually transfer your files, right? My medical records, digitized somewhere. If I am to transition or to travel to an Abia, for instance, you have my medical record on the blockchain that, is tamper-proof. What we're trying to do is to serve the underserved. There are regions that are not, covered anyway, even in Lagos.
We have quite a lot of people who are in the rural areas who still have access to a smartphone. So I think all you need at this point is just have access to a smartphone and you can receive quality premium healthcare. The team behind democratizing healthcare, the team behind technology is also collecting data in that process and making sure that all this data is compressed in one place, because for a very long time as a nation, we've been making decisions when it comes to healthcare without data. But with the advent of technology, with the advent of telemedicine, with the advent of these tools, we can not just access these data, we can also process them.
Although digital health in most African regions is still in its infancy, advances in smartphone connectivity, data management policies and data infrastructure are starting to change the ways health systems work in Africa. And with conversations like these, it is clear that digital health tools could play an important role in boosting health system performance in Nigeria and also help improve efficiency.
And to migration issues, dramatic footage released by Italian Coast Guard shows a group of migrants desperately attempting to reach safety after their boat sank at sea. Footage during one of the recent rescue operations shows the migrants asking for help, trying to swim towards Italian Coast Guard boat as life buoys are thrown at them. Italy is facing a surge in sea migration from North Africa, with more than 28,000 arrivals in the year to date, compared to around 6,800 in the same period, 2022. More than 800 migrants arrived in Lampedusa after being rescued by Coast Guard over the weekend and early Monday. And to Kenya, where the police has recovered 73 bodies, mostly from mass graves in a forest in the eastern part of the country, thought to be followers of a Christian cult who believed they would go to heaven if they starved themselves. The death toll, which has repeatedly risen as exhumations have been carried out, could rise further. The Kenyan Red Cross said 112 people have been reported missing to a tracing and counseling desk it has set up at a local hospital. The cult's leader, Paul Mackenzie, was arrested April 14th following a tip-off that suggested the existence of shallow graves containing the bodies of at least 31 of his followers.
2017 is when police got interested in this person. But I'll let you know, there are many other people we are following up, we're interested in, whom we believe are involved in similar issues. So there's a lot more happening, not just this person, but there's a lot of effort being put to arrest, and anybody found culpable will be presented, will be taken to court to answer charges for the wrong he or she will have committed.
We will look at the charge that will really punish the individual who was involved in this. The penal code might not be sufficient, but we will look at and see, depending on what kind of evidence we get, to be able to allow us to prefer charges that are commensurate to the crime that has just occurred here, which is horrible.
From Kenya, we head to South Africa, where police say 3 men have been arrested there for stealing a 2.5-meter-long crocodile worth about $1,300 from a farm in the Northwest Province. The men, who are all aged between 20 and 35, are believed to have used a pickup truck to take the animal from a crocodile farm in the Habisfontein area, about 200 kilometers west of Johannesburg. Police said the crocodile was found tied up with rope and wire, and in an abandoned farmhouse. The men had covered it up with 3 branches in an attempt to hide it. Police also found the pickup truck. The men were arrested last week and are due to appear in court. Police spokeswoman Colonel Adele Mboge said they are investigating how they managed to get the large crocodile out of the farm, which had secure fencing. She also said the crocodile was badly dehydrated when it was found by a team of police officers and animal conservation officials, adding the crocodile has been returned to its rightful owner. And finally on the program, we are back talking Sudan. Even as the conflict there rages on, a Sudanese artist is using art to bring hope to the war-torn country. Kali Dabri uses his drawing to show solidarity, and he also advocates for a peaceful resolution.
In his living room in Norway, while the TV broadcasts pictures of the violence back home in Khartoum, Khalid Al-Baid does what he has become known for in the Middle East and beyond, drawing cartoons. His latest, entitled The Dogfight, depicts the 2 main Sudanese foes, Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and paramilitary leader General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, as dogs fighting over a piece of meat in the shape of Sudan, while around them stand figures depicting the alleged regional backers on each side. Drawing cartoons, which he publishes on social media, is a way for him to cut through the propaganda of either camp and show there is a peaceful alternative.
Art is needed in times like this because it's important to show people. Art is about, hope. Art is about showing there's a different way to talk about things.
42-year-old Al-Ba, known in the Middle East for cartoons on the Arab Spring, government misrule and wars in Syria and Yemen, he uses this latest drawing to show solidarity to the people of Sudan.
It's all about spreading the understanding and having something that makes sure that, you know, this is everyone's place to show solidarity. So art is continuous resistance. Art is our way to continue fighting. No matter what's happening, artists will continue to write history day by day.
With the internet still up in Khartoum, Alba is in constant communication with friends and family, or reposting practical advice to his social media followers, like how to behave at checkpoints in the hope of helping those trying to leave.
Video of our house in Sudan.
And that's our program this afternoon. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.